quiet down. That was really good. So there must be teachers in the crowd. Really nice. So we have really again, a fun event. Welcome all to our annual Asian American Parents Association, or AAPA Spring Luncheon. My name is Jeff Moe, and I'm the AAPA Vice President. And I'm going to introduce you to first to our co-presidents. First of all, Jerry Ma, who will talk about the AAPA organization. Jerry.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming to this great event. And I hope you will enjoy the lunch. AAPA, probably some of you may already know, it started like a small group about more than 20 years ago. Along the way, AAPA has been growing, and we have held a lot of events over the years. So AAPA has been working very closely with our school district and the community to promote our main initiatives, and which we have here. So we are trying to establish dialogue with the two school districts, and we're also trying to develop parent awareness programs. We are going to promote student training and leadership programs, and we really want to encourage community involvement. So in general, we hold two main events each year. One is like today, we call it Spring Luncheon. Most of the time we invite some keynote speakers to give a talk. It could be different topics, such as just personal experience, or anything about school issues, case issues. So today we're going to have a topic about youth mental health issues. We also, at the same time, we hold an essay contest to 8th grade. And also we give out teachers mini grants. And the other event is in like late September or early October. And we normally invite speakers to discuss issues our parents or students are most concerned about. Okay. So that's the two major programs we have. So now I want to introduce our board members. Shani Tan, our co-president. Kristen Nan. She also the board member. Hong Wei. Jeff Mo, and Jeff Hong and Jeff, they are both board members of FUH. And Shu Chang. Shu? Okay. Jeff is not here. Jack Chen is not here. Not a movie star. Okay. Catherine Liu is not here today. Okay. Jerry Liu. Jerry. Lian Zhao. Lian. Yi Ding. Yi. Emma Fu. Oh, she's there. Okay. And we have a new member, Kathleen Wei. Yeah. All right, thank you so much. So I'll give the mic to Jeff. Oh, Jeff. Oh, sorry.
Well, hello, thank you all for coming. I'd like to take a few minutes and introduce some our guests here. Today we have our mini grant donor, from Teresa Hong. And Teresa has been our supporter many years. We thank you all for your financial support. And then also we have Cupertino School District board member from we have is it Young Child here? Yes. Oh yeah. Christina Lane. She was AAPA member, also school district board member. And we have Stacy Maxey. Yeah, Stacy. And also I would like to introduce a board member from Fremont High School District. So we have, first we have Tom. Polly will be here soon. And of course Jeff Moore. And Roy sitting in the teacher seat. And Bill welcome. And then actually foremost, I want to introduce our keynote speakers today. They're from Stanford University. First is Dr. Rona. And also Steve Su. Also, we have a guest from Saratoga School District board member, Sophia Kao. Also, and we have Rose, they call it District Governor of Rotary, and Orion McConney, and also the President of Cupertino City Council. And yeah, that's our guest for today. Of course, we have a whole table of teachers, but I will let you introduce yourself later on. That's pretty much all for now. Okay, back to Jeff.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Jerry. Let me just make one tiny correction. Tom Abakumovitz is the assistant superintendent. He's not on the board. He keeps trying to get on the board. No, you're the assistant. We have to separate here.
And Stacy.
And Stacy also works with the CUSD district. Thank you. Okay, so let me just tell you real briefly what's coming up next. The very next thing we'll be doing is eating. So it's really excited about that. And then after that, we will have our essay contest awardees, presentation for them, and then we'll go into our keynote speech and conclude with the awarding all the mini grants. So I will turn the mic off for a while, and let's get our food here quickly. Thank you. Hand over the mic to Humboy.
Thank you, Jeff. We have very talented and busy students. Most of them, or at least one of them, need to be the top 50. Aaron, are you okay saying or you need to be? Great. So, every year we ask 8th grade students in the Fremont Union High School, in the Cupertino Union School District to give us an opinion of what they think of school. Sometimes if you want to be a mayor, what do you think the mayor should do? This year, that's right, we got a couple of mayor and local mayors. This year, do we have any principals here? This year's topic was, if you were a principal, what would you do? So we got some students input, and then I'm going to introduce two of them. We have from Pike Middle School. Let's see if I can pronounce your name correctly. All right, come on up. First, 8th grader from Pike Middle School. She said if she were a principal, she would like to not just academically great for schools, but also take care of students' social, emotional skills. And she would like to have a better connection, relationship between student counselors and students. And also, she believes that we need to empower our students to take care of the school. So she would like to implement a clean-up program for students to clean up high middle school. And that would empower the students to take care of their campus and also own the part of that. So, Rona, thank you for your suggestion. We're going to give it to your CUSC board members for every year so that they can go and tell the principals what the students' wishes are. And we have Jerry, we have a check and gift certificates for our students.
Yes.
Already.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're
Okay, right there.
Yeah.
So today, actually, a group upset by me, I spilled water on her. So I told her, water means money. You have money coming your way. And it is true. She's getting a $100 scholarship from AAPA. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Aruna. Our second advertisement winner is actually a daughter of very old board member Jerry Ma, and her name is Arwin. Come on here, Arwin. Liberal Middle School, right? And she's going to Liberal High School soon. We have somebody who has and that Bruno is going to Cupertino High School. Who have And Arwin has some interesting suggestions for the principals. She would like to, she's having more hands-on experience in schools. You know, I guess a lot of homework and she's got buildings. She would like to have more hands-on experience for students. And she also would like the teachers to take tests more seriously than just homework. And she believes that is what the students really show whether you learn things or not quite homework. So I think I get it because a lot of teachers get a lot of percentage to you. During homework you get a good percentage and test is just a small percentage. So she would really like the students to show that it is really important to study and really learn the materials and show very good test scores. And also, this is something for parents too. She would like encourage students and parents to take school as a place where you can unlock the potential and find your passion. So it's not just what you learn, but what you love to learn. Okay, so we have $100 for you too, and a certificate. Congratulations. Okay, can we have the dad come on next?
One more?
Bring back to you, Jack.
Thank you, Hung, and congratulations again to the awardees. Can we get one more round of applause? And keep writing. It's a great thing to do, so keep writing. Okay, I want to introduce a couple of guests who came since we were doing the introductions. First of all, Cupertino Mayor Darcy Hall. Yeah, come on up. And then also City Council Member Barry Chang. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Darcy Ball. He said just 20 seconds.
Okay, so I just want to thank the AAPA. I really appreciate all the efforts that you make. This is a very serious subject. I want to get the support of all the schools We're going to put the issue of gun violence on the city council agenda, most likely sometime in June. So I'm not asking to.
No, the microphone is not good.
Okay. So I'm not asking for, I know it's a very opinion-oriented issue, and we're very heavily into our kids' education and safety here. But I want to make sure that we have that conversation. So just keep tabs on our June meetings in the city council, and I'd really like to be able to get something on the way of a conversation about really effective solutions and how we can interface with each other from our school districts and the city. I've reached out to Brian Murphy from Deanza, so they'll be participating. It'll be a study session. And in terms of the legislation, there's research out there that basically says, look, we don't know for sure what actually works, but we need to have a conversation. And I think if we, really put our heads together, we can do something really effective. It's just that, I feel like we need protocols, and we need to know how to communicate with our communities. So thanks very much for that. I know it was a little more than 12 seconds.
All right, and now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers.
Jeff, there's a microphone problem.
Okay, how about if I just talk?
Yes.
All right, so we're really pleased to have two speakers today talking a subject that's a very important subject to all of our schools. As part of the Fremont Union High School District, it's one of the issues we really work hard at and struggle with, and that's student mental and emotional health. So it's really an appropriate subject for us all to hear, and we're looking forward to it. So our two speakers today, Dr. Rona, who is Medical Director of the Acute Psychiatric Inpatient Unit at Stanford Hospital, specializing in the care of those with serious mental illness, including schizophrenia, bipolar, and depression. She completed medical school and residency in psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, and fellowships in pharmacology and schizophrenia research through the National Institutes of Health. She is also active in minority issues in cultural psychiatry and has received regional and national recognition for clinical care, research, and teaching. She is also the founder of CHIPAO, which we'll hear more about. So, did I say that right? Okay. It's almost like Chipotle, but it's very And also with us is Dr. Steve Sust, who received his bachelor's degree in psychology at George Washington University, worked as a psychiatric technician at a Virginia State Psychiatric Hospital, and conducted imaging genetics research at NIMH with Dr. Weinberger's group. He received his MD at the University of Virginia, then completed adult psychiatry residency training at the University of Pennsylvania, and child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship training at Stanford University in the community track. And just to give a little bit of an aside, he's a real Philadelphia Eagles fan, who, as you all know, won the Super Bowl, so he's still excited about it. All right, so Dr. Sust grew up in downtown Philadelphia as the middle child in a traditional Chinese household during the 80s, and with his unique journey fostered a strong academic interest in Asian mental health and cultural psychiatry, which he continues to pursue in his early career promoting integrating behavioral health and Asian primary care clinics within the Bay Area. So again, it's my honor to present Dr. Rona and Dr. Steve Sust.
If it's easier to go without the microphone, I have to warn you that I had a car accident just last week. So if I pause dramatically, it might be because I'm pausing dramatically, or it might be because I run out of breath. if you can hear me okay, I'll try like this. Wave wildly if you can't hear. And then, anyway, but it's an honor to be here. And there's actually, should I try? There's actually a couple of areas of commonality with Dr. Sust. Can we try? There's a lot of feedback. Is it working at all? This could be a problem. So, yeah, I didn't know you were a middle child. I'm also a middle child. And we're both ABCs. And we're part of a group at Stanford called CHIPAO. Actually, I have to say that I've been at Stanford since 1998, so that's coming up on 20 years. And for all this time, I've been medical director of the locked unit at Stanford, which is where people go most often when they become suicidal, less often when they've tried to hurt other people. But we've seen the severity of the problem. If you can hear all right, I'll just
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Does that work? Yeah. Does that work for the cameraman?
Yes. All right.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So what I'm talking to you about today has not been my day job until quite recently. Because of some of the attention that we've got from Stanford CHIPAO, the Department of Psychiatry is now sponsoring my being able to hand over.
Tested? Yes, good. Back up to the podium? Okay.
No, not good.
No? Not good? Distorted. Okay. Yeah, you sort of sound like the voice of God.
Okay, I'll just talk about it. Thanks. So where was I? Voice of God? No, before that. My day job is taking care of patients in the hospital. But after 20 years of running the acute inpatient unit, the Department of Psychiatry is now sponsoring the opening of a uniquely Asian specialty clinic in the outpatient clinic. So after doing 20 years of taking care of people after they have attempted suicide, one of the things that we've realized is that as important as that is, and I wouldn't have traded that for anything, we also need to do more preventive efforts to really stop the problem before it gets that bad. So we're going to be starting an Asian clinic. If you have ideas for a name with a good acronym, you know, so Asian Studies at Stanford would not be a good acronym. But if you come up with a good one, let me know. And then we will start in July, and then the locked unit will be somebody else's responsibility at that point after Jake Fallon. So in 2015, actually, I'll go back a little further. So starting very soon after I got to Stanford, the Palo Alto School Board asked if I could do some talking to parents, specifically Chinese parents. And my first reaction was, oh, I'm not a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Dr. Sust is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm not. So I first said, no, I really can't do that. But they said, but you can talk to the parents. And so starting about 2000, I started talking with the parents on an irregular basis. And one of the things that they noticed was that there was this burgeoning population of Asian parents and Asian kids coming to the school, often specifically to come to the school district. And initially, the school didn't know what to do with the Asian parents. There were child rearing practices that were unusual to them. And I also experienced this coming in 1998 to the locked inpatient unit, where a lot of my staff would say, wow, you got to meet these parents, they're crazy. And then I say, oh, what's happening? And for example, one Stanford student said, my mom starts all conversations with, have you eaten? Isn't that weird? I said, actually, that's pretty standard. But she was raised in an area where there weren't a lot of other Chinese parents. So coming to Stanford, having misunderstandings with her parents. She didn't realize how much of what her mom was like was not something that her mom had just made up to torture her. And so, you know, I've treated quite a few Stanford students over the years. I've spoken for the Stanford sorority, specifically for Asian young women, and these topics kept coming up. So that's been going on pretty much since 1998. And at this point, Palo Alto School District is 40% Asian. And my understanding is that Cupertino is much more. 80%? Does that sound about right? So this is something that we realize if you ignore the issue, that doesn't really help. So I've been giving talks now and again, whenever needed, whenever invited, for Asian parents. And then 2015, something very tragic happened, which was that there were 4 suicides. Not 4 suicide attempts, but 4 deaths in 1 year. And all 4 of these young men were Asian Americans, specifically Chinese American. And so I remember when the 4th suicide happened, myself, Dr. Sust, a number of colleagues, we said, we have to do something. We have to have a panel and talk to the parents. And one of the interesting things was, behind the scenes, there was a little bit of pushback. Some people said, well, will you be targeting these parents? And I said, yes. I said, but why? I said, because we need it. I said, why Asians? I said, because it's our community and we're hurting. So we had a panel, and it was very well intended. Dr. Sust was there, a whole bunch of Asian American mental health professionals and people who treat Asian Americans. But one of the interesting things was when we handed out question cards, a lot of people wrote at the bottom of the cards, show us, don't tell us. It wasn't enough to say you should communicate better with your children. Everyone wanted to communicate better with their children, but a lot of times there were these misunderstandings that weren't anybody's fault. And so, for example, one mom said, you know, they won't talk to me. You know, I ask questions. And so one example of a question that one of the young women who was on one of the panels said that when she was very depressed and cutting herself, her mother said, what's wrong with you? And the mother would think, well, that was a question. But the girl said, there is no way to answer the question, what's wrong with you? And the mother also said, I need to know if you're doing something stupid. And she said, you can't answer that question, right? It's like, yes, I'm stupid. That's not, it looks like a question, it has a question mark at the end, but it's not really a question. So that was something so that came from one of the young women, and then coming from one of the parents, and this ended up being one of our first skits. One of the moms said, okay, I'll tell you exactly what happened to me this morning. My son came to breakfast and he said, I'm so stressed out. I have a math test and I didn't study. So I said, this is what the mom said, so I said, well, you should have studied. And then my son grabbed his backpack and ran out without having breakfast. So what was I supposed to have done? It's my job, I'm his mother. I'm supposed to tell him these things. And so so that became our first skit. And the operative format is, I'll use tech terms, version 1.0, version 2.0. Version 1.0 is how it really happened, and we're very clear with all of the skits that we don't make up stuff. So I'll tell you about some of the skits, and actually at the end of this, if you have some suggestions, we're always happy to add new skits. But you know, the version 1.0 is how it really happened, and then we stay in character. I usually play the mom when it's a Chinese family. Dr. Sust sometimes usually plays the moderator, has been called in to be the dad, even though to do so we have to put gray stuff in his hair. Yeah, he's obviously very useful. Not old enough to be the father of a teen yet. I am, by the way, the mother of a teen. So a lot of the skits are based on things that I said when I was a teenager, but more and more I find some of the skits are based on what my daughter has said to me, and then I find, you know, a lot of my version 1.0s now come from being me as a mother. and like how I would like to react differently next time. So, and actually one of the questions you might have is, how much of an issue is this then? Is this just a Palo Alto issue? I mean, when all of these suicides happened, and actually there were ones going back, what they called a cluster, somewhat inaccurately, going back to 2009, a lot of people said, oh, it must be, I don't know, technology, it must be affluence, it must be, they had lots of things to, quote, blame it on, and that wasn't very helpful. There's probably more than one factor for any given death, but we wanted to do what we could, so we know that what we're doing is not everything, but we think it's a factor where if we address it, there's no downside. That's one thing that we really like about what we're doing, is that as doctors, I'm always prescribing medications to people with side effects. And you know, a lot of times the side effects are worth it because the desired effect is preventing suicide. But better communication between parents and children, there's no downside, right? There's no bad side effects. And we make sure not to charge the parents. With the schools, we might have to charge a little bit for, you know, just the setup and so forth. We need a sound system and so forth. But and we've arranged things so that we don't want any school to not be able to do it because of cost. And so up till now, everyone has been completely volunteer. So almost everyone has been a psychiatrist. We've also had an undergrad, medical students. Now we have medical students from other areas, from UC Irvine, for example, a very wonderful South Asian medical student who wrote wonderful South Asian scripts, and we're expanding to Latino parents as well. But getting back to the issue of, you know, is this an issue just for Palo Alto? Does anyone else have this problem of depression and suicide? And one of the things is that the national statistics are that Asian American youth are at a higher risk for suicide than their non-Asian peers. So they're at a higher risk. They're more likely to die by suicide, unfortunately. They're more likely to have depression that's untreated, much more likely to be untreated. And the risk factors are different. So top risk factors for non-Asian youth is often things like drugs, alcohol, financial difficulties, poverty, and romantic disappointments. And those aren't the top issues for Asian youth, for which my mom would say, well, that's great, because we don't let you, you know, smoke or do drugs, and we don't let you date. But it's not just that. The top issues for Asian youth is familial discord, often around academic expectations. That's like number one, and that's not even the top 10 among non-Asians. So that's something that we want to be able to work on, because there's good reasons for that discord. It's not something that each parent makes up individually, and that's something that I think in this area, because you know, your kids are likely to know other kids that are Asian. It might be something where they don't feel like they just made it up. But I know that when I've spoken to the Stanford students who come from all over the country, many of them say, you know, they feel like their parents just made this up. And actually, when I gave a talk at the sorority, you know, and I said, you know, how do Asian parents deal with sexuality? And in unison, all the girls said, they don't. And then we talked about various other things, and I said, but where is this coming from? And when I said, you know, they're not, your parents aren't just making this up to torture you. They looked at me and said, they're not. So, you know, in this area, I mean, so my own daughter keeps me up to date on what the kids are saying. And so, have you heard the Asian grading system? A equals average, right. B equals bad. And then F is find new family. So this is the pressure that the kids are feeling. And some of it they're getting from the school, some of this they're getting from each other. Oh, so since I have the attention of some principals and staff and so forth, I can tell you, I won't tell you who exactly said it, but if there wasn't one of you, you know, was like talking with the parents and said, oh, we're training your kids are going to be the cutting edge. Your kids are gonna, your kids are gonna have jobs that haven't even been invented yet. And I thought, well, that's well meant, but it's a lot of pressure because the cutting edge is a very narrow area, and it's also dissing everybody who has jobs that are invented yet. I mean, mayor is a pretty good job. It's not. Yeah, I mean, I thought doctor was a pretty good job, but it's not. It's been invented already. So the pressure isn't. A lot of people were sort of saying, if you're going to be talking with the parents, then you're blaming the parents. I said, no, that's not. Parents, and I am a parent. We're all trying to do the best we can. But if you grew up in a different setting, then some of the assumptions that you grew up with are different than the ones that your children grow up with. And I'm not saying assumptions are bad. We need assumptions to get through the day, right? I have to know that when I turn the doorknob, the door's going to open, right? I have to know when I put one foot in front of the other that things are going to be okay. Actually, since I mentioned the car accident, I have to assume that, like, when you're stopped in traffic, that everybody else is stopped too. Oh, wait, darn. So you do have assumptions, but what you have to know is what your assumptions are and how they're different than the other person you're talking to. And there are so many assumptions that are very different between immigrant parents and the kids raised here. And as I said, we started with East Asians, Chinese American community, Korean American community, and so forth. And then more and more, we got requests from South Asians, so we've done that next, and we have wonderful skits. Actually, we replaced some of our East Asian skits with the South Asian skits, because quite frankly, there's one called Bad at Math, and I had written a skit, and I did it based on myself, but Indian Dad is so much better than Chinese Mom. I mean, Indian Dad. And then now we've also expanded, because of requests, to Latino parents, because there are also issues there, and in each skit, they're written by people within the community. We work the 1.0 and 2.0 versions together, but we try to make it so that it's very realistic. So one of the things we want to convey to the parents is not that they have to have a brain transplant between 1.0 and 2.0. It's not like everybody's happy in version 2.0, but that subtle differences in how you say something, make a difference. So for example, the one on you should have studied, when the mom said, what should I have done differently? So we do that skit over again, where this time the young man, when he says, I should, and then, so this time instead of offering a solution right away, which one of the things we offered the feedback to that mom was, he can't study right then. So even though that is helpful advice, the timing of it could be, that he's about to, and she was upset because he didn't have breakfast. So it's sort of like, okay, so I'll pretend you're the young man. So you're like, so in the first one, I'm like, standing up and it's like, well, you should have studied and whatever. In the second one, I sit down with him and it's like, that's too bad. What do you think happened? And he says, I don't know. I was like, oh, maybe you got busy with the robotics. And then he says, I'm not giving that up. That's the only thing I like. I said, okay. And then meanwhile I'm serving him food, so he's going to have a good breakfast, right? And then I said, well, what would make a difference? And then he says, I don't know, going back in time. And here's where the immediate, because I've had that happen myself. The immediate reaction that you might have, the automatic reaction is sort of like, well, you can't do that, right? But instead, the mom answers, I'd like that too sometimes. So now we're on the same side of the issue. I'm not his enemy. So that's a very simple skit. They get more complicated. There's one called Bad at Math, where the young man gets a terrible grade. And actually, this is very funny because the actor for it is one of our psychiatrists, Shashank Joshi, and the guy comes in and he's like, I got a 48. And then the dad's newspaper comes down very slowly. And it's like 48 out of 50. No, 48%. And then the entire audience is like on pins and needles, waiting for the explosion of, that is not acceptable. We have we have one called Unsuitable Boy, which is one of my personal favorites, which is when the daughter is dating someone that the mom doesn't approve of. And actually, every single line from that one came from my own youth. So people ask, they say like, what mom would ask his SAT scores? And I said, my mom. And then they say, the line, well, so there's a line from it where the mom says, he's not as smart as you, and then which was an actual thing, and I said in real life, you wanted me to get the best SAT scores in the school, so I did. And then she said, yeah. And I said, so it's not physically possible for me to date someone whose SAT scores are as good. And my mom was like, is there a problem with that? So in that case, then, instead of being on opposite sides of the issue, because if you draw a line in the sand, and this is what we do between version 1.0 and version 2.0, is ask what the kid thinks and what the parent thinks. And in that one, I'm like, I forbid her to see that boy. That boy is unsuitable, so he's not, he's not Chinese. Actually, we've done different versions of Unsuitable Boy, but in one of them, one of our psychiatrists, maybe I won't say his, I'll just say his name out loud. Francesco Dandekar, half Italian, half Indian, unbelievably handsome. And so when we did it to the Chinese school, all of the parents started calling him excessively handsome boy. So, in real life, when I dated someone who was quite good looking, my mom was alarmed. And so if you're sort of like, I forbid you to see that boy, then the moderator, Dr. Sust, asks the teen, so what are you going to do? And she says, I'm going to sneak around. And then he asks the mother, is that what you want? Well, no, but she should know that I'm on her side. She should know that these are my concerns. I think he's a ladies' man. I think she's not going to be able to say no to whatever he says. It's like, what if you talk with her about those instead of questioning her judgment, telling her she's basically stupid, telling her that she's too ugly for this boy, all of which is not going to go over well. So we do those version 1.0, version 2.0. I can tell you a little more about some of the skits. I do want to keep track of time, and I also want to make sure that Dr. Sust is able to help with, how are we doing on time?
It's 1:20.
How much time do I have? I'm very flexible. Not physically right now, but yeah. Okay, so
Q&A pretty soon?
Huh?
Can we do Q&A pretty soon?
yeah, let's do Q&A pretty soon. But one of the nice things is that we were our skits made it to the front cover of San Jose Mercury News. There was a less than flattering picture of me in an apron declaring that I was never going to speak to my daughter again. And so I'm on the front cover, like, glaring. The teenager in that particular skit was Yi Ding's cousin, Dr. Grace Liu, who makes a very believable teenager. And so she was on the cover of the East Bay Express going, like, what is your problem? And then we were on the news, the evening news, KTVU. We were picked up by National Public Radio, and so at this point, what we want to do is we want to reach as many schools as possible, as many parents as possible, and so come up to me afterwards and give me your card, and we've been performing them. We've also had some videos. So our website is stanfordchipao.com, and it's CHIPAO. You're asking what the difference is. CHIPAO is a celebration dress. Chipotle is and the Mexican restaurant chain. So it stands for Communication Health Interactives for Parents of Adolescents and Others. But it's also a secret signal, CHIPAO, that, this is founded by and originally for Asian parents. So I'd like to do Q&A and have Dr. Sust also help with answering questions.
Are there any questions?
Let's do it without the mic. It does have some
So,
kind of voice.
so of all the sessions and skits you do, what were the parents' reactions? Do you see any changes in parent behaviors, or do they learn something?
That's a key question, because the reaction right there in the audience is wonderful, but what we want to see is what the behavior is. So we're trying to get funding to be able to, have them, have us email them, have them email us, and actually do a research project. That's going to take a little bit of funding, and so we're applying for that.
Right, but it's a good point though, because I think that the point of CHIPAO is that it's about having the discussion and not just be like us talking down to you. I don't even have kids, and so I know how difficult it is and how hard it is to sort of hear someone like me tell you what it's like to how to communicate with your kids. And so what I sort of see this as is the beginning of all parents, everybody being able to have better conversations with one another. I would argue that a lot of our problems that we're having with young men and women have a lot to do with a lot of our poor communication and us not being able to help them learn how to have meaningful conversations with one another. I don't want to get too far off topic, but the point is that what I see as the value of CHIPAO is just starting the conversation and engaging with parents like yourselves in this dialogue as your kids are trying to navigate their way through their own world amongst their peers, but also as they're starting to grow into adulthood and having to interact with adults and how to interact with just a lot of different people. So parent change in behavior, I think they're even coming to our performances is already a step in the right direction. The key component that we have is how do we keep this going? How do we keep this community neighborhood dialogue coming along? Because that is the only way we're really going to be able to get around a lot of these problems. You can't just have a class and suddenly things go away. What's going to happen is that our unity is what's going to save us. Your kids reaching out to each other when they notice something's wrong with their other friend. I'm not going to get help myself, but if my friend pulls me aside and we have a conversation about it, it sort of brings up the awkward topic in the room that everybody also notices. So
One change that we already have seen even in the moment is they come up to us and they talk to us, and that's great, but they talk to each other. And this is something that I remember growing up, and my mom and her friends would do the brag complain, which is in this wonderful movie, basketball fans, called Ping Pong Playa. It sounds like a stupid movie, but it's actually, and there's this scene where the parents are kind of brag complaining. It's like, oh, my daughter, she's so busy at Harvard Medical School, but now she wants to go to Africa to help strangers. It's like, yeah, my son, in the middle of law school, he's running the Boston Marathon and all that. And then they turn to the mother of Ping Pong Playa and say, so, your son got a job yet? So the kind of thing of, not saying when you're worried about your kid, not wanting to admit that vulnerability, watching as the parents hang out with each other long after we've finished our skits and just start saying, it really worries my daughter, it really worries me when my daughter is so anxious about these things, and they talk about stuff, and they talk about, and stuff that they didn't want to talk about before, like eating disorders, like, my daughter, she always wants to lose weight, and she's on these crazy diets, and I don't think she looks healthy. And then another mom says, yeah, my daughter too, and then they start talking about that. And so that's really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you first of all for your great presentation and all the wonderful work you're doing. I worked for years with Project Cornerstone in the area of parent engagement. And one thing we found is that the parents that were coming to the parent engagement type workshops were kind of the same people that were engaged. And some of the ones that maybe need to work on the communication, it's harder to get those people to come. And now I'm with Cupertino School District, we offer things that are helpful to parents, which it's hard to reach the vast majority of the people except those few that continually come to parent engagement, parent improvement events. So how do you get people to come to even realize that it's a skill that they need?
That's a great question. We've been trying to do a lot of our advertising by word of mouth, by WeChat, by forums, and we're very committed to. We've been told by Stanford Graduate School of Business and so forth that we should charge, that they'll value it more, but it's less about the value. Even if they don't remember where this came from, you know, if they have better communication skills, that's fine with us. So we want to make sure that there's no impediment to them showing up, and that they can show up at the last minute and they don't have to sign up. And but there's still, so, you know, not charging, sometimes support having childcare for younger kids, things like that. You know, we try to do that, but there's still probably going to be a gap. So the videos that we have, right now the videos aren't terrific, but there's something. A lot of parents don't want to show up because they don't want anybody else to see that they're concerned. So that even showing up to hear a mental health related topic is like a potential source of shame. So I've had that conversation with any number of parents where they say, oh, no. You know, with patients, with people who've already had a mental health issue identified, I've often told parents, you know, oh, there is Chinese-speaking NAMI, there's a Cantonese NAMI, you know, Santa Clara, San Mateo, all these different areas have, you know, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese-speaking NAMI, and the Asian parents often stop me before I get through the entire sentence. You know, it's like, you know, oh, we're too busy. And I said, I haven't even told you what night of the week it is. But as soon as I say, you know, there's a group of Chinese speaking, and they're like, no, we don't want to do it. So it's still a big question of how to bring in the people who are most resistant to it, because the most resistant to it might need it more.
Right, and I just want to add one thing to it. So one of the things that I've started studying a lot more is what's called help-seeking behavior. And what I've come to realize is that kids are no different than you or I. It's really, really hard to reach out and go and get help. And for a lot of these kids, they actually don't know where to get help. And even though we want to help them, they don't see us as that person that they can actually trust and talk to. In a lot of ways, parents are a lot like that too. They're really busy, they have a lot of things to do. And coming out to another discussion of this kind of topic, you know, is not something that they think is something that needs to be worked on right then and there when they're trying to work however many jobs in order to be able to afford to live around here. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that going forward that we'll be able to do a lot better is making it easy for kids to find some sort of, you know, trusted help. Either they talk to their friends or they find someone at school that they have confidence will be able to help them. I think that a lot of times we just haven't really come up with a way to make ourselves more accessible so that people can come to us and ask questions, whether they be serious or minor. And it sort of forces me to think a little bit more outside of the box, to not just sit in my office, wait for people to show up in my office, but to actually work with, you know, great people like yourselves who are coming out on a Saturday afternoon to come here and talk about this topic. Because right now, you all are in the front lines. I'm over in the office, and I need to do everything I can to help you all, to help these kids, and to help each other.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to two issues and to provide some context for it. And those issues are corporal punishment and bias. Bias is the second word. And so the context I want to provide, I think a lot of the immigrant families come over here and they feel like, you know, there's a certain amount of a scale, a thumb on the scale that's against them. And the mentality is, you know, we have to make sure our kids attain a certain level of achievement. And that is perhaps one of the most surefire ways to assure that you don't get beaten down, okay? So in the process, right, there is a mentality that goes, we have to make sure that they do as best as possible. All right, so just given that context, I was hoping that perhaps you could just speak to some of those issues. I mean, I know for a fact, okay, as the child of immigrants that came to the Midwest of the United States, that these are real perceptions and real practices. Do you find for instance, in the current context, you see fewer immigrant families engaging in corporal punishment? Because, you know, my sense of it is that in East Asian cultures, particularly in Chinese cultures, that tends to happen, with a much greater deal of frequency than say in more of a kind of a Western European mindset, at least insofar as, I'm going to beat you into good grades, are concerned. So can you speak to, those issues? And then in terms of like bias and discrimination, I don't think I need to elaborate, but I mean, that true or not, it's a perception that's out there. So
Those are two separate questions. I'm going to answer the corporal punishment one a little bit shorter and go into a little more detail on the other. So there are sort of different disciplinary styles between Asian parents and non-Asian parents, and it's often misunderstood by non-Asians. But I do think that it's important to know what some of the standards are here, because Babel Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Who read that? Who knows it exists? Okay, who read it? I have like parts underlined and highlighted. I have a friend who put hers in the garage because she can't stand to have it in the house. But it does sort of talk about, withholding dinner or, things that a lot of non-Asians consider to be verging on child abuse. And one of the things that I think is helpful in having the dialogue is that when people either said, oh, these people are monsters, this is child abuse, that's not helpful. It's sort of like, because that we love our children, but we may have different ideas about what's best for them. Everybody wants to do what they think is best. But it's, so, and I think actually that's one of the ways to get to your question about, like, bringing the parents in. I think that when people feel blamed, they're not going to come in and get help if they're just going to get lectured to. So if it's sort of like, yeah, this is a challenge. So that's one thing. And then the question about bias. I think one of the big issues that other people don't realize is that, so the opposite side of these people are monsters and child abusers and so forth. I mean, that's not accurate and not helpful. The other thing that wasn't accurate and not helpful is Asian parents are no different than anybody else. I remember people saying that, and it's sort of like, well, I know that's not true. It's like, and somebody was sort of like, is it insulting, is it stereotyping to say that Asian parents are more likely to this and that? I said, wouldn't it be insulting and stereotyping to be, I would consider it insulting if sort of like, there's this whole culture going back centuries, eons, and that someone who's coming from that and speaking a different language and having a completely different childhood should have exactly the same assumptions as, Ozzie and Harriet, or Leave It to Beaver, or any of this. But that's not accurate either, right? Actually, even that's too. You don't even know who Ozzie and Harriet is.
or Roseanne. That was actually an issue last week.
Yeah, Roseanne.
In the TV show, they said, well, oh, they're just like us. They're talking about a couple of, shows.
Yeah.
Johnny Goodman was making a joke. He's like, oh, I get it. The Asian show and the African American show, they're just like us. I get it. Let's change the channel.
Yeah.
That's actually top.
So and it gets to the question of bias. There's not only a different, eons of different culture and different background and different language and different assumptions, but then there's also the immigration process itself. And one of the things that I've tried to explain when people are sort of like, you all are so intense. And it's sort of like, well, okay, in a country of 1 billion people, there are probably some that aren't intense, but they didn't come over here. It took a lot of work to get over here. And actually, in Silicon Valley, we're like really, really intense. So a lot of people, so you were raised in Philly, I was raised in Wisconsin. There were fewer Asian people there. But then, anyway, just, so this is a pocket of intenseness, and there's other pockets of intenseness all over. But you're South Asian? Are you South Asian?
Yeah, my parents are from India.
So one of the things that I noticed with my South Asian friends is sort of like, every engineer in this area went to IIT. And there's lots of engineers, but the ones who didn't go to IIT didn't end up here. They went somewhere else. So everybody here's from IIT. And so in terms of assumptions, the Asian ladder of success is often genuinely a ladder. You miss a rung and you'll tumble to the bottom and never recover. There's a test that you take that you don't get to take again. And everybody above this part is going to be okay, and everybody below is not going to go to that school. So there's a first school and a second school, and everybody knows what that is. Many Asian parents come here and they look for the IIT equivalent. And they decide that it's Stanford, or they decide it's Harvard or MIT, and then if you get into there, you're going to be okay. And if you don't get in there, you will not be okay. Your entire life will be ruined because, you know, everybody has in reality, so that's not a reality that they made up, that's reality from the home country. So my father made it out of China before the Cultural Revolution. His brother did not. His brother had a very different life that I don't want to get into right now. But, you know, so my dad's experience is it's a ladder and you cannot miss a single rung. The American system is a mountain. And you can kind of go this way, and you can go that way, and you can rest, and you can go down, you know. And there's there's room for a lot of people, and you can rest. And there's, you know, you take one test, you transfer from a community college to a four-year college. There's, you know, and I like to remind people that Steve Jobs went to a college that nobody heard of, right? Reed, and then he dropped out, and Bill Gates dropped out. And, you know, Mark Zuckerberg dropped out. So that there's not just this one ladder, but so back to your point about bias. The thing that Asian parents want to do, because there is some bias, but what they don't realize is that the insistence on a particular test score and so forth is often not productive, because the bias is often around the bamboo ceiling, as they say, is often this idea that, you know, that Asian people don't have connections, Asian people are kind of nose to the grindstone, we're too quiet and shy, we don't speak up, that kind of thing. And, you know, so the Tiger Mother said that she doesn't allow her kids to go on slumber parties, and there was a very good article by David Brooks saying actually to their ultimate success, if you want to call it that, might have more to do with slumber parties and, you know, the shifting alliances of a pack of girls, and then the test score. And so the emphasis on so there is sometimes a thumb on the scale, but what I think Asian parents sometimes don't realize is that it's different than the thumb on the scale. So in the home country, it's often test scores. In the U.S., it's often who you know. And so the things where, you know, I don't know, my parents were mad because one afternoon I went to go cut the hair of my best friend at the time. And they thought that was like the stupidest use of time ever. But, you know, we did some girl-girl bonding during that time, and we're still friends now, you know, 30 years later. So, you know.
Got one more question?
Just let me, well, sorry. One thing I wanted to touch upon that Dr. Hu I thought was really valuable was the discussion of how what we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce options and alternatives to parents, and also in the same way, you know, kids as well. I think a lot of what Dr. Hu was talking about was what we call like the cognitive rigidity, you know, this idea that things must be done one way, you know. Or when I told my mom and dad I didn't know if I wanted to go to med school and I wanted to take some time off, you know, their heads exploded at the time. And you know, that's so to say that, you know, here there's obviously the recognition that there's more than one way to do things, and in a lot of ways, parents don't always know that, and getting to talk about, you know, the bamboo stick and the corporal punishment is important, because we need to be able to introduce other alternative things that they could be doing. Each and every one of your kids that you work with all want your positive compliments. They want to know that they're doing well. And I know this because they're playing video games, and video games have zero value in real life. But dang, they really want that high score, or they keep going back for again and again. And that's because there's positive reinforcement built into the video game. And it is there to sort of get them to continue doing a behavior over and over and over again. And what I sort of see again as sort of the next thing that we have to do in my field is figure out how to work with educators, parents on utilizing this very powerful system of behavioral psychology that's already in place to sort of help harness kids' ambitions and the things that they want, and turn it into something that helps them learn how to do certain things along the way. I think one of the bigger issues that we have right now, again, is that we don't necessarily get to talk to the kids about all the different options that are available to them, because for a lot of them, they're really busy trying to do well, wanting to get your compliments, your love and affection, whatever awards and whatnot. And I think that that's important too. But I also don't want them to overlook the fact that there are a heck of a lot of options out there. And those deserve discussion equally as much as going to, say, a Stanford or Harvard type place.
Just a brief introduction. I'm a Saratoga school board member from the neighbor district, and I'm also involved in a ministry, actually serving all the Chinese immigrants. We speak Mandarin. It's a family vacation camp, and we share the same exactly the mission to help the first generation immigrant and to with the parenting and to build a relationship and self growth. And I saw your video. I was really, really impressed. Actually, I refer, because I've been serving on the family vacation camp for 14 years, and we have this camp every year. I've been referring your video to our co-worker team, and I think we should do something like that. It's a really great program to remind the parent how is the best way to interact with our children. I'm so glad that I can see you here today. And as a first-term school board member in Saratoga, and we have over 60% of the Asian students in the community. However, I realized I have two questions. So one is, I think lots of the, like in our district, or maybe some of in the Cupertino, lots of the parents, it's a language barrier, right? So as a first generation immigrant, lots of the parents have it's the culture and the language. So my first question is, do you have any plan to incorporate your program into maybe the real scenario is, the parent may speak Chinese, right? And the kids may respond in English. Do you have any plan or any some resource to translate that into a more realistic scenario? I think that will attract lots of the immigrants. And I can connect you with the ministry I served for 14 years, because we address all this program in the Mandarin fashion. So that's my first question. And the second question actually is, I just realized serving on the Saratoga school board in the past over 1 year, like you already mentioned, I think a big kind of disconnect among the parent, actually a big thing we should maybe talk to the staff, because in our district, Saratoga, lots of the staff, the teacher, they not really understand why the parents reacting that way. So it creates lots of the tension and the miscommunication, even mistrust. So I think it would be really, really helpful if you can speak to our staff, like why we end up here. I should exactly like you said, because every one single of us reaching to Silicon Valley is like the top of our class. My son in Saratoga used to tell me, "Hey mom, it's so strange. How come all my classmates' dad is the first in their class?" Right? So they were really in that kind of a very competitive environment. That's why we naturally expect so high of the children. But it's difficult for the teachers living in this environment to understand where the parents come from. So I want to invite you to talk to our district and maybe talk to our staff. I think that's a twofold. It would be really helpful.
The American assumption, which is accurate here, is that most things are going to be okay, because historically that's been the case. And for most immigrant parents, not just from China, but from a lot of things, the assumption is that unless you're very careful, things are not going to be okay. And that there's always, and this is something that I've tried to convey. I've now been talking more to staff at Stanford about this issue, because when they treat families, it's sort of like, why are they so rigid? And it's sort of like flexibility is generally better than rigidity, but if you're in a particular situation that's very unforgiving, then you might have to be that way as well. So I try to point out, every Korean family knows a family member that they're never going to see again. Every Vietnamese family has family members that were never seen again. Amy Chua's family, she talks about an uncle who was tortured to death by the Japanese. And so there's so much trauma and grief in most immigrant experiences. And so, hunger and death and all that. So it's not a safe assumption in the original place that things are going to be okay. That if you get a C, it'll work itself out. But truly here, it's different. And that's one of the things that we're trying to get the parents to see, we're trying to get the staff to see. But yeah, the whole idea of your people are crazy. That's not that. So, but just sort of like, this is the reality where you came from. This is a different reality now, and this is why you came here. You came here because the reality here is a lot more safe. So we need to work on it.
Right. And, so one thing I wanted to say is that that's a perfect example of how having some sort of consultation would be helpful in sort of rendering that clinical perspective on the case. And certainly that, you can email my chairman if that's something that you're interested in like terms of getting like our consultation for any of your cases. But I think this sort of brings up like a larger topic, which is how do we sort of work together on some of these cases in a meaningful fashion. The last thing a teacher really needs is another professional development day where you've got someone like myself talking about some. Sorry, I know a lot of teachers in the San Mateo High School District, so I don't want to. I guess in a lot of ways I'm glad that we're even talking about it now because I don't know what's happening on the front lines of teaching, and in a lot of ways I'm still trying to figure out how it can be useful in your life other than being that dude that sits in the office. And while I agree those kinds of cases are certainly difficult, I would also argue that the teachers and the parents actually have a common goal, which is your child growing up to be happy, healthy, and educated. And how do we work together towards that goal? And trying to work with the parents and the teachers and the students together towards reaching that common goal is like the thing that we're searching for. But sometimes it's the conversation can be heated, and that is where having someone to consult with, someone to talk things over with, and just trying to get a better perspective on what angle to sort of to approach it at. That's the best way to go.
Can we give a round of applause?
Thank you so much for your insight and then what the work you do. It is very important to bridge the connections between parents, especially immigrant parents, and their students. And we know that you're doing great work, and then as a school district, we have a lot of school districts here, and then I'm sure we will get a lot of connections and costs. So a little token of thank you from Asian American Association, Dr. Sust, because you
It hurts, right? You don't like that. But what's different is that because I did that to my parents, I'm not like mortally wounded. Whereas for the parents who didn't do this to their own kids, then it hurts a lot more. So we're trying to bridge it out. So check out all our videos.
Okay, well, we'd like to move on to the final portion of our session, which is to give out the teacher mini grants, and Shelley's going to help with that.
Well, I am a product of the Fremont Union High School District. I went to Mar Vista High School, and it's my first year teaching at Cupertino High School. That's really fun. So I am teaching cooking classes, and this year we collaborated with UNICEF Club and Cooking Club, and my students in my culinary classes, and we created a banquet that served about 80 students. It's called the Oxfam Hunger Banquet, and it brought attention during our international week to hunger and poverty around the world. And it was a fantastic event, and I'm so privileged to have received this grant. So thank you very much.
Amanda Phelps Wade.
So I'm here on behalf of the World Core team at Cupertino High School, and I'm very excited about our new project. We're putting in a book club unit for students. We were looking at some of our curriculum and recognizing that 80% of the literature that they read over the course of their high school career is white male. And so we wanted to bring more diverse kind of representation to our literature, and also to bring in more student choice. So the project is bringing in 14 different books for World Core. The students get to choose off that list, and they're working with a small group kind of over the course of a 2-week unit. So on behalf of World Core, thank you very much.
Nicole Della Santini? Santina?
I'm here representing.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Yes. I'm a prom. Thank you. Jessica
Liu.
Hi.
Okay, thank you, Jessica.
I'm also a product of the Fremont High School Union. I went to Limbrook, and it's my first year teaching at Limbrook now. So we have these things called mini tutors that we use to demonstrate protein folding, because as Arlinda mentioned earlier, it's important to have hands-on experiences, not just, online demos and textbook pictures. So protein folding is a really complex concept, but when you have these things, you can do things like put markers on them and then demonstrate how proteins fold. And there's really helpful for that. We can have students model actual proteins, as well as talk about how proteins react in certain situations. And and they also get loaned out to like physics and math and do wave functions and things like that. So Nicole couldn't be here because she lives way out in Santa Cruz. So I'm here to represent the science department. So yeah, thank you so much for your work.
And I heard all about protein folding from board member Roy Rockland, whose son is heavily involved in that. So it's a big deal.
Yes.
That's what I heard. It's a big deal. Okay, next is Naomi Rollins.
And Danny.
And Danny. Do you both want to come up?
I have my notes on a napkin so I don't forget anything.
One of your names.
I'm Danny Howard. This is Naomi Rollins, and we work at Lindbergh High School. We're both English teachers. And one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is how to revamp the writing process. Oftentimes the hardest part kind of happens after the fact. Our students get notes, tons of notes on their essay, and then they don't really know what to do with it. They end up throwing it in a trash bin, or they're like, I didn't get my A, and then they come to us and cry, or whatever. And we were like, we're going about this all wrong. We want to have conversations with our students, and the reason we got into this is because we want to talk to them about their thesis statements. We want to talk to them about their topic sentences. We want them to become better writers. We want to have those conversations, those individual connections with our students. So one of the things we started researching was blended learning, taking some of the cognitive lifting that's the hardest and putting it back where it belongs in the classroom with us so we can help them. So we've been online, on blogs, on Google, because when you don't know something, of course you Google it, right? So we've been Googling our heads off and trying to figure out how to move that back into the classroom, and we found these resources, we found these books that really would help us start to move that where it belongs back in the classroom. But we didn't have the funds to purchase the books, and we ended up getting your email about the grant just at the right time when we really were at the end of our blogging trail. And so anyway, your grant could not have come at a better time. We get to order our books now and learn more about blended learning and really teaching our students how to be better writers. So thank you so much for this.
Danny really inspired me. She's a second-year teacher. We actually met in Scotts Valley where we started working. I'm like a 9th-year teacher. She has inspired me so much to care more about, moving forward and being an English teacher in my job, but also I'm a drama teacher as well. I really want to talk to you guys. And so putting this sort of flipped model, I even tried it in my drama class. She encouraged me to do that, and we just see that we can use this as an opportunity not only to help our students, ourselves, but also our other colleagues, and that it would have some far-reaching effects. So we are so appreciative. Thank you.
Heather Bonvecchio.
So I'm representing the special education department at Homestead High School, and
The special ed department at Homestead, I believe, is the largest in the district. We work with almost 200 students. And as such, our staff is one of the largest departments on campus, and we're growing really, really quickly, and we have a lot of amazing staff, but our space has not been growing with us. Space is always kind of an issue, and so I've been kind of looking at ways to kind of update some of our office furniture where largely our paraeducators kind of live throughout the day, like that's their kind of home away from home, and so this money is going to go to buying some new office furniture for them so that they can feel like they have just a well-functioning and clean space to work and be. So thank you very much.
Kumi Kobayashi.
I teach Japanese at Pembroke High School.
Yay.
And this money will be spent for Japanese one class in Cupertino High School and Pembroke High School. So we work together to develop a unit plan for Japanese one to be able to talk about social issues in Japan. And we found a film about Osaka, a town in Osaka, who struggles with mental ends needs, but community center supports the children and the parents. But those are not on the DVD in the store. So we had to borrow the DVD from the documentary movie company, but we had to pay for it. And we did a film day, but we couldn't quite make the money. So we asked for help, and we got the help. So we don't have to find out of pocket to pay for it. So my students have been learning about how different things are in different places in Japan. Japan looks perfect and so advanced and beautiful and pretty, but actually everything is similar. We have similar issues here and over here. Not so much, we are fortunate here, but if you look closer, if you talk to the neighbor, there are more things and more diverse that students are not aware of. So the students also did an interview and learning more about their own community and comparing it. So this will be in the key. Thank you so much.
Marty B.
I advise a lot of clubs at Cupertino. One is a math club, and I teach math there. So we have several students in the club. Every week we meet once on Fridays to do competitive math problems, sort of like math Olympiad type problems. And our students really like to compete. So earlier this year we did a competition at Stanford or Berkeley. With this grant we're able to go to the Santa Clara Valley Math Association Field Day. And there we had several students compete in a different wide range of competitions from algebra to calculus. And there's actually a name for it. It's called the Mad Hatter Marathon. And so that really enabled us to send students to a competition outside of school where they could compete against other students from across the entire Bay Area, and they really got a lot out of it. So thank you.
Claire D.
Thank you, everyone, for this. I'm not a product of Fremont Union High School, but I am a middle child. So I teach art. I teach 3D design at Homestead High School. And I love teaching sewing because as a child, as a teenager in the 1970s, my mom taught us to sew. And one day I wore my Van Gogh vest to school, which took me a whole summer to sew, to embroider, excuse me. And one of my students saw it, she said, could we make those, could we learn to embroider? And I thought, be still my heart. So we started to make little samplers. And with the money from the Wind grant, I'm happy to say that I will be buying thread for sewing as well as embroidery hoops. And I am tickled pink that my students love to embroider. I feel like even their millennial, addiction to their devices, even they know and that they need a break from constantly doing that with their hands, and to actually create something. It's very meditative and it's very soothing. And of course, I always explain to my students that there's a tradition of a home sweet home little samplers based on a song back during, I believe, World War I. Not that I was around then, of course. I created a little design for my students to make, which is based on Home Sweet Homestead. And I'm hoping that they will take to the idea. I'm sure that you will, although it is a pretty ambitious project. So this was my little beginning of Home Sweet Homestead. So thank you everybody for the opportunity for our students.
In the final word, I think Denise didn't make it, right? Yeah, she had her car vandalized this morning. The last award is to a team. It's the Read 180 team, and there's a few of you here. Is that right? Yes. So would you all like to come up together? And the check is in the mail. Congratulations.
Okay, so we represent 3 different high schools. We are at Cupertino High School, we are at Fremont High School, and we are at Homestead High School. And we work with students who are challenged and really struggling with reading and writing. And so we have a specific program that we work with them on to raise their reading and writing levels. And the magical thing that happens for these students is at the end of the year, we have a parent night. We do little videos and, photos of them, and then we buy them a book, and we do a big fancy award for them. The parents come, and their brothers and sisters come, and they get to see the video and learn how these students have progressed. And then we gift them with a book, and they are just so grateful and just appreciative. So we were able to buy the books for these different students, and say thank you for all of their hard work over the years. So thank you, we appreciate it.
Well, that was it. So thank you again. Reading all your mini grant applications is inspiring. So, and it really makes me feel our kids are in good hands. So really appreciate all the hard work and the pushing the envelope you all do. And I think that's, one of the primary reasons our schools are excellent is because of what you do. So you work hard to make them excellent. Really, we deeply appreciate that on behalf of the community, on behalf of the parents, and our kids really benefit from that. So with that, we can all move on and have a great rest of the day. Thank you all for coming. And